So Marvel Rivals came out. It came out early December, and it has been taking over the gaming world by storm. It's brilliant. It's reignited this passion for Marvel, and one observation most people might notice is the X-Men are back. Now, outside of the Capcom collections, where they bring back old games, the X-Men really haven't been allowed to appear in Marvel gaming licenses, mainly due to the whole movie deal and stuff and not cross-promoting. Now that Disney own Fox and all of that and have all the rights back to the X-Men, they're popping up in games again, like Marvel Rivals. And we have a few people, but we don't have a particularly large amount of the X-Men, especially when you consider just how many people there are who count as mutants in the Marvel world. It's arguably in fact, I don't think it's arguable. It definitely is the largest group in the Marvel franchise, and to have the number of characters on the roster be from the mutant sphere feels kind of wrong. Like, we need more. So this video is going to be me pitching two ideas, full concepts, kit and all, for X-Men who should be on the roster, as well as a few runner-up ideas with general rambling about how I think they would play. Without further ado, thank you for watching, welcome to Hamada House, and this is my pitch for X-Men that should be in Marvel Rivals. So, before we actually get into my pitches for this video, the characters who we're going to be talking about, who have like actual breakdowns and a full set, I do have a few runner-ups I'd like to talk about. Characters who I would love to either do content on in the future, who are part of the X-Men world and mythos, who definitely deserve to be in this game, or just characters who I'm genuinely surprised aren't in this game, which is the case for the first one, that being Cyclops. Cyclops is the leader of the X-Men in most scenarios. He got a brilliant portrayal in the X-Men 97 cartoon, following on from the 96 series, which will probably get mentioned a few times throughout this video. And he overall is just really fun. He'd probably be a duelist, but I could see him as a Vanguard, giving out boosts to other players on his team, or maybe even rarely, but a tactician. I've seen a lot of people online pitch him as a tactician. I don't know quite how that would work, but it'd be really fun to see them try. His optic blasts make for a really cool weapon, and with how they did it in 97's cartoon, a really cool way of giving him mobility, which is something I never considered until watching that show. And then for my second runner-up, before we get into the proper video, it's Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of my favourite characters from the X-Men world. Whilst he's no longer really a villain in comic books, he's still recognised by the general public as one, and the roster is severely lacking of real villains. The only real bad guys being Hela and Loki, who, if you're like an MCU watcher, you probably don't even count Loki as a proper villain. So Hela's really the only actual bad guy on that roster. It would be nice to have someone else who the general public at least view for a villain. And to be honest, outside of Juggernaut, it would be nice to get more bad guys. I also think Juggernaut could really play into the destructible maps. He's got a bunch of mobility potential with his charges and his running, and he just is like a perfect pick for an iconic Vanguard to be on the roster. That being said, both pitches this video will be for duelists, and our first one is coming right now.
Mutant intruder neutralized.
The name's Gambit, mon ami. Remember it.
The Cajun X-Men himself, the man from the Bayou. Gambit is a beloved fan favourite character, and I think especially with his appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine, it's only right that we get to see him in Marvel Rivals. His portrayal in X-Men 97 was spot on perfect, and even prior to that, in all his cartoon appearances and in the comic books, he's pretty much always loved, and at the top of a lot of people's list of characters for anything X-Men related. He's got a really fun and flashy power, and I think he'd make for a brilliant DPS. Although, interestingly, whilst this pitch is for a duelist of Gambit, I actually could see him working into any of the three sort of roles. His power being to supercharge the particles of anything he touches, making them either explosive, or in the case of people, making them heal faster, physically stronger, or even blinding their senses, means that he could work for mitigating damage, setting up hazardous terrain, much like Penny does, acting as a support and healing people by supercharging them, making them deal extra damage and heal quicker, or by just working as a duelist, which is what we're going to be pitching here, and dealing out as much damage as possible. So I sort of mocked up a little character breakdown here on the screen, as you can see. It was a bit of fun making, actually. So let's just get into his attack. Right, so he'd have two types of fire. Well, kind of. His initial primary would be his charged cards. Gambit's known for throwing playing cards out when he fights, and I think it's such a core part to his character design and concept, you have to have it here. So Gambit will throw playing cards. I imagine he'd have a reload set of about 13, so he'd fire 13 and then he'd have to reload. Well, obviously, you can reload early. Now, I give that a number, mainly because that's how many cards are in a suit, and I think it's thematic. I won't be giving exact numbers on how long it takes for certain abilities to activate, how long they last, how much damage things deal, mainly because these types of games are all about balancing, and if this was the actual character being put forward, those numbers would be massively altered and stuff. That, and I'm not a particularly high-ranked player, so I don't want to sit here and give out exacts. I just want to have fun making the concept. That being said, charged cards would deal minimal damage. They would not be a super high DPS initially. However, when you hit a wall or a floor, the card would stay stuck in it. It would be visible. It has like no health basically, so you can shoot it to destroy it if it's an enemy. And if it's stuck into a person, Remy will see that person as slightly glowing. He can stick up to all 13 cards into a single person. The more cards in them, the more damage they will take when he detonates the cards. This is because Remy's iconic throwing cards are explosive. That's what his alternate fire is, detonate. Whenever he reloads, all cards currently around will explode. If they're inside a person, that person just takes damage. If they are on the floor or a wall, there will be a small radius around the card, and if an enemy's within that radius when he detonates it, they'll take damage. The damage being far more than the initial throw. That's sort of the idea. He throws cards in, and he has to know, based on how much health the opponent has, when to reload so that it detonates the cards. His reload animation would probably be a little slower than most of the DPS in the game, solely because he has to sort of juggle whether the detonation is worth it or whether he should keep throwing some of those cards out. Now we get onto his abilities. So his first cooldown I call Supercharge. Basically, Remy's cards that he throws and his melee attack become supercharged, dealing extra damage. In addition, enemies will detonate the cards that he has stuck in people when they deal damage to them. So if Remy throws a card into a Hulk, and that Hulk in Remy's perspective is like slightly purple because he's thrown cards into them, and Remy hasn't reloaded yet, if your magic suddenly teleports in and swings on that Hulk, those cards explode, dealing detonation damage. Basically, it means he can solely focus on throwing his cards and not have to worry about detonating while he's in the supercharged state. Remy's secondary ability is not a cooldown. It kind of works a bit like Moon Knight's combos, where basically Remy fights with his retractable bow staff, and it has a 2-hit combo, the second of which knocks enemies back. Kind of like how Moon Knight's third hit has a knockback addition to it. Remy has the same, but it's on a quick 2-hit jab. This is because he really doesn't want people up in his face, and it just gives him a bit of distance so he can see the whole battlefield around him. His bow staff does come in, however, on his third ability. This one is another cooldown one, Explosive Getaway. Doing this, he creates a small explosion in front of him and launches himself into the air in the opposite direction of what he's facing. This would, I imagine, have a stackable feature where you can have 2 of these readied. think of like some of the dashes in the games, or more along the lines of Star-Lord's barrel roll. Only instead of getting invincibility frames and a reload, Remy creates a little explosion in front of him. It means that if someone's diving you, you can deal a little bit of damage and get into the air. This would also be Remy's only real mobility power. And then we move on to Remy's passives. Remy has two. I've based these off of things he can do in the comic books with his powers, little sub-features they give him. I kind of feel like that's what all of the passives have been going for anyway. Powers that the characters are supposed to have, but they don't necessarily fit into cooldowns or the base kit. And I think it's a really cool thing to do and a fun thing that they've sort of added into the game. So his first passive is Dissolution. Basically, destructible objects receive double damage from all of Remy's abilities and attacks. So this is something that really sort of stuck with me when I realised nobody in the roster actually has abilities that play into one of the main gimmicks of the game, that being the destructible map and the incredibly high amount of summonable objects. So characters like Groot, Rocket, Namor, Moon Knight, Penny, all of these characters summon things with their own health bars that need to be shot by players to get rid of them, and yet there's no abilities that really tie into dealing with these. In addition, the maps are all breakable and destructible, yet no one has abilities that specifically are anything to do with it, which is fine. I just think it's a bit weird that they haven't had any gimmicks around any of these features when they're such a staple to this game. So I gave Remy one. Basically, if he attacks any of these, he does extra damage. This is partially because when he throws his cards, they basically do no damage in comparison to what you'd need to break a lot of these things. So this means they can at least be used. But it also means that if he sets his cards up on a wall, and when he detonates it, that entire wall is just going to come falling down. It's a fun little thing. It also means that Remy's going to be really good at dealing with penny nests. Just a nice little counter for him. So I completely blanked and forgot to record the second passive ability I gave him. So real quick, it's basically a play on the fact that Gambit can disable all your senses with his powers. And so it's called Disruption. And what this means is whenever he reloads, from the start of the reload, he has 6 seconds where he is completely silent and cannot be heard by anyone. In addition, passive abilities that would sense him, such as Spider Sense and the Punisher's Hunter Vision, basically won't pick up Remy. So what this means is he can play into it and reposition himself while he's vulnerable and reloading. The 5-6 second thing is purely a random number. The idea is this is meant to be a short period of time. While he's reloading, he's just undetectable. And then finally, under the abilities section, we have his ultimate. Remy's ultimate is Wildcard. Wildcard means that Remy throws 52 charged cards out in a cone in front of him, and they stick to everything and everyone. Basically, it just fills everything he's looking at with cards. The cards last for about 15 seconds or so. Once again, numbers are not solid. And then at any point he can reactivate the ability Wildcard to make all of the cards explode. Now, while they're there, before they disappear, before they vanish, they're kind of like small mines. They're like Penny's mines. So if you walk over them, they will explode and they'll do damage. But he can also just purposefully activate them, causing the explosion. The explosion having a bigger radius than the detonation radius. You have to walk directly over them to blow them up, whereas the explosion is going to be an area around them. Generally just creating a big hazard zone. It's going to be really good if your team's about to take point, so you quickly just throw it out and make it so the enemy team can't run on point for 15 seconds. And if they are already on point and you're trying to push onto it, you now have a massive explosion you can immediately set off. Just a generally useful power. Next up, we have Remy's team-up abilities. So I have 2 of these. One of them is a team-up ability with characters who are already in the roster, and one of them is a hypothetical team-up ability for a character who isn't on the roster, and I'm also not doing a pitch for today. The first one is Kinetic Loading. This would be a team-up ability with Wolverine and Magic, where Remy is the team-up activator, and Wolverine and Magik gain the bonuses. When activated, basically Wolverine and Magik both gain access to the team up ability button. Pressing that button will make Wolverine's claws glow, and it will make Magik's sword glow. While glowing, the weapons deal increased damage, and if at any point they hit a stuck card, whether it's on the floor or an enemy, they will immediately blow it up for more damage than if Remy detonated it. It's just like a fun little way of giving them an interaction with Remy whilst making them deal more damage. The main way I could see this being used in actual gameplay would be if you pick Remy and they take Magik, you'd get yourself into an advantage point where you're firing ahead at the back lines whilst the Magik dives in, activates the ability, and suddenly you don't have to worry about making sure you're detonating your cards because they're going to be blowing them up for extra damage. Whilst if it was a Wolverine, you'd probably stay huddled in your team. The minute the Wolverine brings back that tank, the Wolverine's going to pop his ability, and you're just going to funnel cards into the back of the tank whilst the Wolverine makes them explode. Generally speaking, just a really useful team-up power. The second team-up is Untouchable. This would exist if Rogue was ever added into the game. Basically, it works kind of like how the Hulk team-up changes innately what one of Iron Man's powers are. This would innately change Supercharge into Overcharge. Now the damage boost from Supercharge is actually higher than it normally would be. In addition, thrown cards now detonate on impact. So this is only while Overcharge is activated. It would have the same sort of cooldown and time length that Supercharge has. But when he's throwing his cards, they immediately explode, meaning you're dealing large damage off the bat, especially given it gives you an even better damage boost. Just a nice way where Gambit temporarily just goes ham on everyone he's throwing cards at. So, something I forgot to quickly mention while talking about Gambit were the skins that I thought he could have. Now, I mentioned his design, and that's pretty much on point with how he'd always look, but for the skins, I do have a couple pitch ideas. Those being, first of all, the white tuxedo from X-Men 97. That fight scene's awesome, and the tux looks cool, and it's just I think in the last year has become an almost iconic look for the character. It's amazing how in such short time it's become synonymous with him. I love it. The next skin being his classic yellow and blue X-Men skin. I actually think every one of the X-Men in this game should at some point get this skin available. It's almost necessary given it's their uniform, it's their colours. We have multiple characters running around with the X-Men logo, but they don't have their yellow and blue skin yet. Now the game's in early days and they're trying to give everyone more character-specific skins, but this is something I'd really love to see. And then finally, for his sort of front page of the store skin, the main skin we'd want to give him is his Apocalypse Horseman of the Dead, or Horseman of Death. Basically, if those of you don't know, Apocalypse has multiple horsemen whenever he shows up who he imbues with power. At one point, Gambit was dead, and whenever Apocalypse picks his Horseman of Death, he picks someone usually who's already died. And in this case, he picked Gambit, bringing him back as this horseman, and it is the most biker metal looking suit you can picture for the character, and I think this thing would sell out like no one's business. So, let's have another look at some of the runner-ups. One character who has become incredibly popular, especially in the Peach Momoko X-Men comics, is Armor. Those of you who've only really watched the cartoons or the movies probably haven't heard of her, but she's a relatively well-known character in the comic books at this point, with the power to create a big bubbly armor. And given how hero shooters often handle shields and bubbles, and given what her power set is, I think she'd make a really interesting Vanguard. Overall, I just think it's a cool concept. You could also sort of take her down the route of being a very well-defended duelist, but I really think Vanguard would be the fit for Armor. And she would kind of be my, if you don't do Juggernaut, do her pick. She wouldn't be my innate go-to. It's just a case of, if you'd rather have a more only known as a member of the X-Men character be on your roster over a I'm sometimes an enemy, I'm sometimes part of the X-Men character, So, the other runner-up we have is Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister being one of the most iconic X-Men villains ever. A character they have tried to bring into the movies on multiple occasions. They recently used him again in X-Men 97. He was in a lot of the cartoons. He's just generally a well-known character. I think he'd be really fun to have as, once again, any of the roles. He is a bit of a scientist. He's known for handling cloning specifically, but I could see him using his abilities to heal people or modify them and give them boosts of all sorts. That could be really cool. He's also quite well known for his power and raw talent, so I can kind of see him as a DPS. But if you were going to lean into more of the aggressive side of Mr. Sinister, I think Vanguard would be the side to go. Maybe he has abilities that buff himself instead. Either way, I think he'd be really fun. He's got one of the coolest designs when it comes to X-Men characters out there, so I can see them using him in a lot of different ways. With that being said, thank you all for watching this far. I'm about to give you my final pitch for this video. But if you guys have any X-Men characters or any other Marvel characters with ideas on what you want, let me know in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. Really do appreciate it. I am so thankful for the response the first video, well, not the last video we got. That was so nice of you all, and I do want to do more of these. I had a Ben 10 related video in the works, but then I got really ill, and then following that was the Christmas time, so I couldn't finish it. But nonetheless, here we go, on to Nightcrawler.
Got 6 reasons why.
No, mein Freund. Nein!
So, this guy is actually my personal favourite X-Men, and Mutant in general. He's arguably one of my favourite characters from all of comic books. He's certainly in my top characters from Marvel, and I would give anything to see him in this game. I care so much for him to be in this that honestly I'd take him as either support or duelist. I really couldn't see this character as a Vanguard though. That being said, I am pitching him as a duelist. I did mention earlier that both of the characters in this video would be duelists. I wanted to sort of pitch the idea of him being a support, a tactician, but I just really couldn't work out how to embrace all of the aspects of Nightcrawler whilst keeping him a duelist. I mean, a support, a healer of sorts. So, with that being said, let's get into what I'm actually going to be doing with this character. So first of all, his weapon, his main attack is his cutlass. He'd be a melee fighter, and it would work in a 3-hit combo. He'd swing his left, his right, and his tail. Not necessarily in that order. Dealing damage. The 3rd hit having a very slightly wider range. So if the person you're punching is walking back a little quicker than you walk, well, you still get that 3rd hit off sort of thing. The 3-hit combo would not be enough to take out basically anyone with full health, but you can obviously repeat it and stuff like that. It's more about how you play him and the picks you go for when we get to his abilities. This is a character who very much so is going to rely on his cooldowns. That being said, let's start with arguably the most important one on this kit, Bamf. Bamf can stack up to 3, so once again, like the explosive getaway, or more accurately, like Star-Lord's teleport, or not teleport, his barrel roll, or Magic's teleport. Bamf can have multiple of itself ready for him to use. They slowly regenerate after a use, and Bamf teleports you either 10 meters in the direction you're facing, or if you hold down the ability button, it teleports you 20 meters. In addition, KOs instantly refresh Bamf. So if you knock someone out, that's an instant regen on one of your Bamfs. Now, I did say earlier I wasn't going to be doing exact numbers. I still want to stick to that. The reason why I've given numbers here is 10 meters is a magic teleport, and 20 meters is double that. So I just went off how the character in the game who already teleports. Honestly, I could see this being further. I think whatever it is, it needs to have multiple variable distances for control and use. You need a combat one and a mobility one, and that's what I'm going for here. Use the 20 meter to get in and out, use the 10 meter to move around while you're fighting. He can instantly attack as he teleports as well. That would sort of be an idea I had, where maybe you can animation cancel as you do the teleport, which means you instantly attack as you come out. The idea here being that he's much faster than Magic, and that's a key difference between the two. The other one comes in with Switch Up. So we kind of have a character who's about grabbing the enemy and pulling them off your supports and whatnot and into the team fight, or pulling them from your enemy's lines into your own team in the form of Winter Soldier. Well, Nightcrawler's kind of a bit of that and a bit of something else. With Switch Up, he can target both allies and foes. He picks one, faces them and presses the button to activate it. When he does, Nightcrawler immediately teleports to that person's location, where like a couple frame animation, it wouldn't be long, it'd be really short, just so that person can see that you've appeared, and then teleports back to where he was. What this means is Nightcrawler can look at an enemy DPS or an enemy support and pick them, teleport to them, grab them, and then teleport back into the middle of his own team, giving your team the jump. Alternatively, if he sees someone beating the crap out of his support, and the support's on really low health and he's in a safe spot, he can look at his support, teleport to them, and then teleport the support to safety. Generally speaking, just a really useful feature for saving people, but then also getting enemies. I just like the idea. It's kind of a bit of a mix between Lifeweaver from Overwatch, and then also just the ability to do what Winter Soldier does, where you hook someone and bring them in. Then we move on to his passives. So these are based on the biology of Nightcrawler in the comic books. So he has the suction discs. These work like all the other wall running abilities in the game. The wall running ability passive is pretty much the same for multiple characters, yet it always gets its own name. That's what this is. And then more importantly, we get Shadow Creature. Shadow Creature is an ability that probably won't come up too often in gameplay. In these sorts of games, you don't like to stand still, you want to always be moving. However, when Nightcrawler stands still for 2 seconds, his passive activates, and he becomes invisible. If he moves at all, the passive disables itself until he stands still for 2 seconds again. In addition, if he takes damage, it deactivates. But generally speaking, it's a passive invisibility so long as he isn't moving. What this does mean is if your team take point, maybe get a team kill, he can stand still on point. And when the enemy team come in, he is not going to be the first to get picked. He can sort of observe the battlefield real quick, decide where he thinks is best to teleport to and start his picking, and then do so. Something that I can imagine happening a lot is if he stands still on point, the enemy have a dive hero, they dive his backlines, he can quickly teleport to a safe location, turn around, face his support, and then switch up, or teleport to the middle of his tanks, and then face the DPS who's diving and switch up, both of which would be really good plays for him as a character. But of course now we must talk about his final ability, his ult, that being Hope Sword. So, as someone who hasn't been keeping up mainly with Marvel Comics specifically, more so keeping up with IDW and DC, I had to do a little bit of research on what's been going on with my favourite character in the last few years. And something of note was the Hope Sword. So, the Hope Sword is a weapon that was introduced to the X-Men comics, and Nightcrawler was the person who ended up keeping it. He sort of stores it inside himself. It's like a magical weapon. It's not too important, but it is a key facet of the character now. So I thought we could have this be his ultimate. Now, this does draw some more similarities between my pitch for Nightcrawler and how magic works, with magic having Darkchild and Nightcrawler switching into Hope Sword mode, but the general idea here is his normal usage wouldn't be to get in everyone's face like Magic's is, but when he activates Hope Sword, he deals extra damage with his Cutlass attacks, and for every damage he deals, he gains health back. So he switches from this careful, you've got to think semi-stealthy, teleport save your supports character, to suddenly diving in and actually dealing damage. People have to reconsider what they think of the Nightcrawler on the battlefield. So everyone has to suddenly switch up to adjust to how he's playing. This change, I feel like, will bring a bit of flavour and a bit of fun to the character. Then we've got his team-up ability. So I only came up with one, and it is for a character who isn't in the game at the moment, and that's Deadpool. If this ability is activated, it's called Lost Bet. Deadpool gains access to one use of Bamf that then goes on cooldown and resets. In return, Nightcrawler's max of 3 Bamfs goes up to 4. So they just both gain a Bamf. I think it's a bit of fun. It's a reference to the fact that in the comic books, Deadpool used to have a Bamf. And it's just a lot of fun. So, as for skins for Nightcrawler, I have 4 instead of the 3 I had for Gambit. So, obviously on top of the basic design that his normal character would have, which would be that iconic Nightcrawler blue skin, tail, the red and black jumpsuit type thing, I also would love to see a pirate look for him. Now this could be the basic in-game skin, but with some pirate additions. I just think with the cutlasses, you could give him like a pirate hat, maybe even a jokey eye patch, I don't know, and then sort of like a pirate coat that sits over him. It'd just be really cool to see. That's why I have 4. That one sort of is there, and that goes alongside this other one being a demon Nightcrawler skin. I just think leaning into his sort of demonic heritage could be really cool, especially with the character and what he represents. I also just kind of think it would slap as a design. What can I say? Then there's Azazel. Now, the game has not strayed away from giving people skins where they're straight up different characters. Penny Parker has a skin where she is the Eddie Brock of her universe, and Peter has a skin where he's Kane. It isn't a thing where the game is like, oh no, characters have to be themselves in case for whatever reason we one day consider adding this person. And if Nightcrawler's in the game, I don't believe Azazel will ever get added, and they basically look identical for the most part, like when it comes to build and stuff. So why not have Azazel be a skin for Nightcrawler? I think it'd be really cool. A lot of people love the colour red, so I just think it would do well. And then the final one, much like the Horseman of Death for Gambit, will be a skin that I genuinely believe would be a top seller for them, and I personally would love to see it, and that is the 2023 design for Nightcrawler, where he was Spider-Man. So for those of you that don't know, Nightcrawler was just very briefly Spider-Man in New York City, and this is what he looked like, and I really think it's a cool design, so why not have it as a skin? That being said, this does bring us to the end of the video. I thank everyone for staying tuned and watching all the way. Keep on top of the channel because I definitely will be doing another one of these Marvel Rival videos. Making the character sheets are so fun and they're relatively easy to record and edit. And I did say I have that Ben 10 video on the way. I want to get it done. It's made, I just need to finish editing it. But with this and then uni, there is a lot of work to be done, so I don't know how quickly it'll be before that one's out. Nonetheless, thank you guys, and see you next time.